Welcome to today's webinar presented by Evangelical Christian Credit Union. I'm Mark Jones, a Vice President and Senior Banking Consultant with ECCU. I'll introduce our presenters in a moment, but first, let's find out who's registered for this webinar. We have nearly 200 registrants from 29 states, literally across the country. In addition, we have folks registered from 4 other countries, all the way from Indonesia to Germany and Canada, all over the world. So 75% of you represent churches, and another 10% represent Christian schools and mission sending agencies. And then we have 15% are from other ministry organizations. Whatever your ministry, thank you for joining us. Now let's review what we're going to be sharing today. First, we're going to be talking about why and how to align money and your mission. Then we're going to talk about the importance of accurately projecting revenue and how to do it. And I know that's a big topic for all of us to address. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you can use your budget to stay on mission. Now, in a survey we conducted last year, we asked participants what the biggest challenge was in their budgeting process. And these topics that we are addressing today were among the top responses. And as I mentioned earlier, projecting revenue was identified as one of the biggest challenges. So I know you'll hear about issues that all ministries are facing today. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Again, I'm Mark Jones, and I've been serving ministries at ECCU for more than 20 years. Joining me today are 2 people with extensive ministry and stewardship experience. Joining us is Billy Burnett, who is Executive Vice President and CFO with Johnny and Friends, which under his leadership is ranked in the top 6% of fiscally managed nonprofits in the country. Billy's ministry has taken him around the globe, including Ghana, West Africa, where he oversaw staffing of a center to restore wheelchairs to meet the mobility needs of families affected by disabilities. Great to have you with us today, Billy.
It's great to be here, Mark. Good morning, everyone.
Also joining us is Arthur Wilson, who has been the CFO with the Park Ministries in Charlotte, North Carolina for the past 10 years. He is passionate about helping the body of Christ destroy the demon of debt. Arthur travels around the country helping people eliminate debt and increase their lifestyle of giving. He also consults with smaller congregations regarding 501c3 compliance. Welcome, Arthur.
Good morning.
Well, Billy and Arthur, before we get started, let's take a pulse check of those who are attending our webinar today. And so we have a poll question that's going to pop up on your screen that we'd like you to answer. And the question is, how effective is your ministry's current budget process? And so please select one of the following options there that are on your screen. Very effective, it's a pretty smooth process. Somewhat effective, it's okay, but we could use some improvement, or we just need some help. So we'll give you just a few moments to answer, and as soon as that comes back, I'll report those answers. So I'll let you go ahead and submit that. Okay, here's the responses. Okay, well, we can see that 15% of you believe your process is pretty smooth, so that's wonderful that we have some folks that feel like they've got a pretty smooth process. But you can see there we have 76% of the folks on the call feel that they could use some improvement, and we hope that we'll be able to help you. And then we've got 9% that feels that you could use some help. So Arthur, we certainly have a good percentage of attendees who feel that they could use some help. So could you share some perspective on why there is sometimes a disconnect with aligning our money or our budgets with our mission?
Sure, Mark. first, I think it's not an easy process. That's got to be realized now. First, it's not going to be a quick do thing. It makes you think. It forces you to rethink what you'll be measuring, because it forces you to think and understand and to know your why. What is your mission? Why do you exist? So often as finance directors and accountants, we go right into how to sustain the ministry. But we got to back up and first ask pertinent questions. And the first question to ask is why? Why do we exist? And that must be clearly understood by all relevant pertinent parties. Another thing is it forces your staff to work together. Because some churches, your operation has their own thing and your ministry staff have their own thing. It's important that we work together and each person know their role to support this mission. Also, it forces leadership to think about how we're going to finance this mission. And I say that to say it makes us to go back and start educating our congregants about what mission is all about, how to become mission-oriented and mission-driven. And that's not an easy thing to do, because most people in our congregation, they come to church and they stay within the four walls and they never go out beyond the four walls. So it's a process. It's a process. I think that's a challenge to most of us.
Yeah, Arthur, you're so correct. Asking the why and making sure people go back to the mission, vision, and values, I think, is a really critical point that you're making there. So Billy, can you describe the process that you take at Johnny and Friends in aligning your budget to organizational strategy?
Well, you bet, Mark. And Arthur, thank you so much for those excellent points you just brought to us. Having been a pastor, and actually still a pastor, active pastor now, and serving here at Johnny and Friends. So I've lived in both worlds in terms of how we fix that alignment. At Johnny and Friends, what we do, our approach to alignment and money is we have a strategic plan model that has been extraordinarily effective for us over the past 14, 15 years. We begin with a SWOT analysis, a very thorough situational analysis of who we are, what are our missional goals, who are our constituents. We look at the we look at the environment, we look at other organizations around us, so we do a very critical SWOT analysis. And then having done that SWOT analysis, we then use that as the platform or as the basis for creating a plan document that produces for us, ultimately produces for us a stated goal, a strategy to achieve it, the objective of that strategy, and the source associated with that objectives. So in essence, we create a plan that is an operating plan for 1 year. We create a plan that looks out 3 to 5 years, and we also have a plan that even looks out over the horizon for the next 5 to 10 years. But what it does is it helps us align all our critical program activities in a very focused manner, and then we apply, of course, what will the resources be required to achieve our stated goals. So in nonprofits, we don't quite have the luxury of having all our folks, all our constituents within the walls of the confinement, as Arthur mentioned, of a church building. So we've used a strategic approach, and it's served us very well. It's moved us from a $4 million organization to a $26 million organization with worldwide effort.
Great.
Very, very helpful, Billy. I know we have a number of resources that we're going to make available to all of the attendees today, and one of the resources that we're not going to have much time to really talk about on the webinar today is a strategic plan model that Billy uses, but we will make that available to you. So when you get the resources from ECCU, you'll be able to see that. So thank you guys for commenting on that. Any, Billy, could you maybe talk just a little bit more briefly, since you've got this great perspective of being both a pastor and also a CFO of a large ministry, and obviously you've seen differences in the way churches and the way parachurch organizations approach this. I know you talked a little bit about that, but could you just give us a little more feedback on that as well?
Oh, you bet. Mark, being a pastor and being a finance person keeps me in what I call dynamic tension. The pastor in me always wants to rise up and say, let's move, let's go, and the CFO in me says, yeah, we'll move after we develop a plan. So that keeps me in a bit of dynamic tension. But I found some of the differences. For instance, as a pastor in a local church, funding a project or funding missional goals can often be as quick as communicating, as Arthur mentioned, and then on any given Sunday, depending on the flavor of your faith, take as many offerings as you need to keep the people inside the building until you raise the money. But with a nonprofit or parachurch, you don't have the luxury of having a self-contained or a captive audience. So there's a difference in that regard. Communication is different in that regard as well. Who your constituency groups are. Where is your outreach? Is it community-based? Is it internationally based? So at Johnny and Friends, we were an international organization, so there are some definite dynamics relative to parachurches versus churches that I have seen. And so how we raise the funding to align our missional goals is one of the ongoing challenges. And of course, we'll talk about in a moment as we move ahead, we'll talk about a process that may be very useful for some of our listeners today.
Great information, Billy. You mentioned communication differences, and that is a very important thing to consider as you look at your ministry, and how close are you to your donors, and how easy is it for you to communicate. Well, Arthur, can you take us through the process that you went through at the Park Ministries to ensure alignment between your mission and budget?
Sure. I think it's about 2 years ago, we was introduced to Steve Logan and this company called Mapping International. Mapping International is an organization that guides and equips churches to fully express their God-given purpose by aligning their mission with their dollars. And he used this above-the-line leadership approach. And that was my first challenge, because I go right to provisions when I get ready to work on the budget. But this process that we were taken through, there was 4 above-the-line ingredients that should be clearly understood by 3 groups of people. That's your staff, your lay leadership, and your board of directors. And it's very important to get those board of directors engaged at the beginning of the process. And so we went to the first step. We all clearly understood what our perspective was. And when I say perspective, I mean your assumption, your ministry beliefs. What does your ministry believe? You believe that they are sole authority by the Scripture, and you understand the role of the church and the person of Jesus Christ. Just a clear understanding and a clear review, really, it should be a review of what we believe. Number 2, you go from perspective to your purpose. Your purpose or your mission. Your mission. That is, you ask the question, what is it that we do? Okay, and what is it that we do well? Because this is important, because it determines the direction of your dollars and how you allocate those dollars. So spending quality time on your purpose, your mission, understanding your DNA, celebrating your uniqueness that you bring to the body of Christ is very important. The third ingredient is your priorities. And your priorities is the action items that you take to fulfill your mission. Again, the action items you take, such as worship, evangelism, your community outreach. Because what you're doing now, you are allocating those dollars for the budget. From priorities, you go to your principles, and your principles are your core behaviors, your values. I think what you're looking at now is we did it for the church, and we went through the purpose, perspective, priorities, and principles, and all of that is pre-budget work, okay? It's pre-budget work. You think about that, and then you look at your provisions. Okay, what do we have? What services, what resources, what products we have to fulfill the above-the-line activities? What this did for us, it made us ask several questions. The first question was, are we currently providing the services at our church based on our purpose, perspective, priorities, and principles? And number two, we asked the question, are the dollars being allocated properly to fit our purpose and our priorities? And we asked another question, number three, we asked, are we equipped with the proper staff to fulfill these things? So we looked at all of those things, and what happened, two things happened for us as a church. We looked at our structure, our org chart, and we put our org, we had to reorganize. And we said for us at University at the Park Church, our priorities is bringing people to Christ, gathering them in Christ, maturing them in Christ, and sending them for Christ. So we did a new org chart, and now we have different org charts now, and we call a group of them called deployment type ministries. Another group is called development type ministries. Grant, you have your worship and your arts and your pastoral care. You're bringing the people to Christ, and sending them is deployment, because we send them to bring them. Development is more like maturing people in Christ. Worship and arts is gathering them together in Christ. And then pastoral care and counseling is also the maturing process. One thing you see a creative team and an operation core. These are your support ministries, and that's a key word, support. That's why everyone on your staff need to know their role. And if you're that means you're not less important, but just know your role. Operation and our creative teams support the ministry. So we looked at that, and then I started looking at the budget. I said, okay, based upon the process we went through, we discovered that we was having some annual events that really was not active no more. That's why I say for every church, be careful when you use that word annual, because you think you're forced to do it every year. Not true. If it does not fit your DNA, if it's not bringing people to Christ, stop doing it. Number two, we start reallocating resources. We put more dollars in deployment and development and global missions. Number three, we really worked hard on cost efficiencies, and that's what every budget person need to do. I mean, we save maybe $60,000 to $70,000 a year and just shutting down a part of our church. Therefore, on throughout the week, therefore we didn't have to pay for the cleaning of that part. So you constantly look at cost efficiencies. Number four, we discovered that some positions are really volunteer versus a paid. Now, yes, that was kind of tight, but you got to include. So what we start doing, including our volunteers in our organization's chart. We even hired a volunteer coordinator to develop volunteers. That's what's missing in a lot of congregations now. Everybody want to get paid, but when you reorg and when you start looking at things, you can see what's truly a volunteer and what is a paid position. The fifth thing, we discovered, and we made sure we had the right person in the right place. Because when you have your missions, and a lot of our churches, we have people doing things, but they're the right person, but they just not the right one in that area. And the final thing that this helped us with is our decision making. Because the process, by going through the process of your perspective, your purpose, and your priorities, you understand your direction. And that was the goal right there. We had clear direction on our God-given purpose. That is the goal. And I stopped trying to measure dollars all the time, but you try to measure transformed lives. Now that's the question. How do you measure a transformed life? The key is the clear direction, you are doing what God wants you to do. And that's where your faith goal can kick in, because you are now aligned. Your mission. You're together. You're not just doing church. You are doing what God desired your particular ministry to do.
Arthur, wonderful process I'm sure that you went through. How long did it kind of take you guys to go through that process that you just described?
We're still going through it. We are still going through it. You know, change is just a bad word in church. We are still learning. So what we do, I mean, we have little things on our desk. Every organization, when they meet, Mark, they must have their mission statement in front of them to maintain focus, because it's easy to get off track in this process.
Yes.
So we intentionally put different things, you know, signage across the 3 campuses, just to let us know and let the congregants know what we are about.
Very, very helpful. And again, talking about communication there, communicating the mission and why we really exist is so critically important. So thank you, Arthur. We now have another poll question that we want to ask. And so this poll question is going to pop up on our screen here, and says, how does your ministry approach setting an income projection? So we're going to transition now to this section on projecting revenue. So we want to ask a question about how you approach that at your ministry. So do you do it as an incremental, a percentage over the current year? Do you do it based on required resources or expenses? Do you do some forecasting? Do you do economic surveys, peer data? You know, and on this question you can select more than one answer here. So click the ones that you typically do at your ministry. And again, I'll give you just a moment to respond, and we will give you the results of that in just a moment. Okay, I think the information is on its way here. Here we go. Okay, so let's see what folks are doing here. We've got obviously we've got quite a few folks. I'm surprised that we've got as many doing some statistical forecasting. 62%. We've got 58% are doing kind of an incremental or percentage over the current year. And we've got folks that are basing it just on the resources or expenses that are required, and we've got a few folks that are doing some peer data and economic surveys. So we are going to jump into this whole topic of projecting revenue, and again, we identified this from a survey that folks said that this was a critical component for their budgeting process and really needed some help. And so Billy Burnett is going to kind of take us through a process that he has used there at Johnny and Friends for quite a few years, and I think you're going to find some really fascinating information here in terms of maybe an approach that maybe we all can learn from. So Billy, why don't you talk to us about the approach that you use there at Johnny and Friends?
You bet, Mark. A moment ago I mentioned that as a pastor we could, for any one of our initiatives at our church, we can take an offering to support that initiative. But in a nonprofit parachurch, you don't have the ability to do that. You don't have the ability to have folks sign up, hand out envelopes on Sunday morning and pledge to give and so forth. So in the environment here at Johnny and Friends, and perhaps some of our listeners as well, statistical modeling, which I learned as an industrial engineer, and then again in graduate business school, I learned statistical modeling is a really robust process that can help an organization to forecast what is happening around that organization, around its environment, to help that organization forecast what might be, for instance, its next funding cycle, its revenue generation, its sales, and so forth. So I've been with Johnny and Friends for 15 years, and I brought the technique of regression analysis, or correlation analysis as it's called, here to the ministry as a more robust method of determining what our revenues might be on a next year to 2 year out basis. So regression analysis is really an excellent tool to generate that process and to get helpful information for predicting what your revenues might be. So regression analysis is the advantages of regression analysis, as I look at them, is that regression analysis is unemotional. It is a predictable scientific approach to forecasting and estimating on a much more robust level. So for us, it has worked well for us. As I mentioned earlier, using regression analysis, I was able to be much more predictive in terms of what our revenue streams might be. And the beauty of it was the prediction is based on our history. It's based on our methods. And it looks at, well, how do you fundraise at Johnny and Friends? Who are your constituents? How do they give to you? So you actually build a body of information, a body of data that when you use regression analysis, it is actually looking at that and saying, based on how you live your lives, this is more likely to be the revenue for next year based on how you do that. So using that has been so helpful in terms of setting the budget, because the other thing that I've learned as a pastor as well is the difficulty in aligning mission with budget has always been, to me, we equate money with carnality. So what we do is we set all our missional goals, and then we say, okay, here's our missional goals, and now this is going to be our budget. So we close up our books and say, God is going to give us what we need to carry out all these missional goals. So then we often want to avoid the potential conflict of this discussion of money, raising money, and then, quite frankly, we see faith as not having too much practicality about it. So when you take the robustness of statistical analysis and you bring that to a well-defined, as Arthur talked about, above the line, a well-defined set of operating parameters for your mission, your objectives, your purpose, and so forth, you now can apply what you believe your revenue will be. And now you have a very helpful process, because you have what you believe will be your revenue. Now you marry back to that revenue your missional costs to carry out your programmatic activities and to be what you were called to be. So then you are now able to do a much better job of aligning that. And we can actually talk about, we have some models here that we can talk about in terms of pictorially what we see when we use statistical analysis.
Okay, Billy, I know we're going to show folks a spreadsheet that you're going to kind of walk us through, and it has the years on it, and we've actually compressed this spreadsheet so we can fit it on the screen there, so you can see across the top years 1 through 3 and then years 17 through 18, and obviously there's a number of years that are missing that are hidden. So why don't you kind of talk us through this spreadsheet so we can kind of understand how you're approaching it here.
You bet, Mark. I'm happy to do that. And to our listeners, I've also built for resources. Mark will talk about that at the end. But I've built a model for you to begin a practice session with that we believe will be helpful for you to get started in the process, if you're not already using statistical analysis and correlation or regression, to get started in that process. And we hope that it'll be very helpful. But what you're looking at here is a spreadsheet titled Annual Operating Budget Forecast. Each year, as I begin to build on our annual income, I got to a point to where I was able to take data, historical income streams, and then to develop and build a matrix of all of that data. And the best approach for me was to take that data and group it by month, as you can see, January to December on the left side, and to group it by year at the top, going from left to right. So we actually have built over 19 years of data that we built and that we put together to help us develop trends and forecasts of what our revenue generation looks like. The numbers that you're looking at on the screen represent a typical matrix sheet and don't necessarily represent the actual income of Johnny and Friends. So I want to be clear about that. But having done that, by looking at this by month, by year, it gives you an opportunity to predict what your monthly revenues will be by month, because no budget is perfect. Some folks actually just take a budget and average it out in January through December and just average it. But the best approach is to be able to look at what might our income streams be by month. This is an excellent tool to determine what your monthly income streams will be, and then to help set your budget activities by month. And you are able to see during the summer months, income streams tend to drop, then they come back up again in the fall. The first of the year, after you close the year, that first quarter, your income streams may be lower and so forth. So you actually get a much better picture of how your cash might flow through your organization. Now, if we'll look at the title parts as I move through this, we have our data now in what I'm calling a month-by-year matrix. And at the top, you see a regression analysis forecast. I have, in this column or in this region, you actually have a spreadsheet function that is called forecast. You plug in those numbers, you plug in that function, and that function looks back across all those years for the month of January and builds a forecast model for your January activities. And you'll also see something called the R factor. And the R factor is actually the factor that tells you how dependable or how robust that estimate is. You hope for an R factor of +1 or -1. Minus R factor means that you are looking at a decline in revenue generation. A plus R factor means that you are looking at an increase in revenue generation. And it also tells you you can depend on that generation as being very predictable forecasting. So you're looking at R factors associated with this data, and you can see some of them are 1, 0.9, 0.88. That means that 97% of that forecast is very predictable. I have what I call an adjustment factor. I look at the environment. We look at what's happening. I read the Wall Street Journal. I read economic reports. I talk to people. And I get a sense of maybe we should adjust that upward or downward. So I put in, I apply an adjustment factor to the process. And over time, you'll get a sense of, intuitively, I think I'll bring that forecast down a bit, or I think we can raise it a bit based on talking to our development department and so forth. So it isn't just a standalone, pure statistical approach. It's an intuitive approach, and it's a collaborative approach using a very powerful statistical tool. So that is, in essence, how I use correlation or regression analysis. Those words are interchangeable. That is how I have used it the past 15 years to give us a sense of what our revenue will be. And the beauty of that is we now have what we believe will be our income for a given year. Our expenses then are fitted to that income expectation, and that expense model then is, we account for some expectation of positive cash flow, and then we take out an amount, and then what's left is what we believe we must allocate to meet our missional goals. So that is one of the best approaches that's helped us. And we have not had, in the past 14 years, we have not had one negative year, and we have always had positive cash flow using this methodology. Now, what we're looking at here, Mark, on this screen is these are some graphical representation of that data. It's now been graphed, and you're looking at the years 1994 to 2006. You're looking at a June income model and a December income model. And as you can see, those trend lines clearly indicate where our revenue generation is going for the month of June and for the month of December. It gives us a sense that this is what God is doing among us. We are progressing in a very positive and upward fashion. We must go slow, but we believe this is what God is doing. And so then you get a very good sense by taking this information, pictorially looking at it, you get a great sense of what God is doing and organizationally where you're going.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, awesome.
Let me take this final look at this last one. This has been one of the most helpful aspects of statistical modeling and regression forecasting. If you'll notice, this represents the Johnny and Friends profile of our income streams over the years. And if you'll notice the left arrow and the right arrow, that region between the left arrow and the right arrow, that change came about because as we looked at the slope of that dotted line, it had an upward projection. But if you can see, if you carry it out, you can look at the difference between our actual income generation in 2008 versus where we were going on that trajectory. We took a look at that and said, we have things we want to do. We have constituencies we want to help. So what do we do about that? So in that year, we decided, let's begin a program to generate more income, to enlarge our donor base, to get more friends to help us. We did that. You can clearly see what happened. And then along the way, every year as I plot that data and I look at what God is doing, I begin to notice that the income generation was beginning to diminish. So as you go from the left to the right arrow, you actually see the curve is actually starting to diminish. And so what we did, we looked at that and said, we've got to initiate a different methodology of talking and communicating to our key constituency, to our friends and our donors. We did that. We began a capital campaign that introduced new people to our ministry, and look at the lift that we got. And then lo and behold, we again began to see that curve at the top right. It also began to diminish. And what did we do? It gave us the opportunity to swing into action, put together a much more integrative and a much more deliberate and vigilant approach to fundraising. We initiated annual president's retreats where all of our donors, our major donors, are gathered together to see the connection and the alignment of our mission, our goals, and our objectives, and the very people that we are serving. So it has been so useful. Again, when I look at that, I don't see bars on a graph. I see what God is doing. I see the effectiveness of, as Arthur talked about, of taking what you do, looking at it through a magnifying lens and saying, we are going to bring this into alignment with our strategic plan. We did that, and you can see the result before you on this graph. And I call it, this is what God is doing graph. And it's been extraordinarily helpful for us as an organization as we have moved ahead. So trend analysis has served us well.
Mark, if I can say one quick thing about this. This is good stuff that Billy has just shared. I think as it relates to churches, I think every church finance person should know their church financial calendar. Not only you can do this annually, I do what Billy just shared on a quarterly basis. And sometimes on a weekly, on a Sunday basis. Because I think a lot of churches now is going through that slump, that Memorial Day to Labor Day slump. This, what Billy just shared, would help you be proactive. Make sure you all have your IT in line. Summer months is not the time for your IT not to be working. We have a little slogan at the park. We say, before you go to Orlando, go online. Because we're trying to get people to be consistent in their giving. Because based on what Billy just said, you see the forecast. You know what happens on Mother's Day. A large crowd but a small offering. So
That's
be
right.
proactive. Be proactive, and that's what Billy's talking about. This is what the forecast can do, not just for annual budgets, but for even weekly or quarterly forecasting at the churches.
That's right, Arthur.
Yeah.
Well, very important. And Billy, one thing that I know as I've worked with you on this a little bit, one thing that you've noted that in your graph that we saw, or not the graph, but the spreadsheet that we saw, if you have any kind of unusual major donation that comes in, you pull that out so that that doesn't skew your results. Is that correct?
You bet, Mark. That's a very good point. I talked about a capital campaign. We initiated a capital campaign, and we built our International Disability Center, paid for, completely debt-free with a capital campaign. But I never included the capital campaign funding in our operational activities. What you want to know is, what are your bread and butter revenues? That's what you live on from day to day. You can always take an offering at a church. You can always get the lift you need, but that's not how you live life. If you live life like that, you will turn your congregation off. So what you've got to do, yeah, exactly. So that's why, that's another reason why that's just been very helpful for us.
All right. Well, now we also know what we measure and pay attention to is where focus is placed by our staff. So Billy, we're going to transition here and kind of talk about how to stay on budget, how to use your budget to stay on mission. So what are some of the key measures or outcomes that you pay a close attention to, Billy, as you are now focusing on the reporting side of things?
Mark, you bet. What we do here at Johnny and Friends, and it sure sounds like that's what Arthur does in his ministry, and that is this: you must measure multiple outcomes. Multiple outcomes. You must measure your programmatic outcomes, but you must also measure your funding and financial outcomes, because remember, they are integrated. They are aligned with each other. They are not siloed. They are fully integrated. So what we do is we look at those critical things that define us. We have multiple programs here at Johnny and Friends. We have a program that we call Wheels for the World. We go to multiple countries, over 20 some odd countries. We do 22 trips with 400 to 800 wheelchairs that have been restored that we take to folks. We collect thousands of wheelchairs every year across the country, restore them in prison. So we have to measure, where are we in the process? Will we meet our goal? We have to look quarterly at how are we doing. Our Vice President of Field Operations has to have his finger on the pulse of that activity. So how well are we doing? Are we on goal to meet the number of chairs to be restored and rebuilt so that we will hit our goal? Because taking wheelchairs is not just about wheelchairs. It's about the delivery of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Every wheelchair touches 100 lives. So when you deliver 5,000 wheelchairs, you have really touched thousands of lives. So we measure that. How are we doing? We look at it early to make sure we're going to be on the process, and then we track. So how is our spending? Are we keeping track of the cost of making this program effective? Effectivity is how we keep in alignment. So we have essentially a dashboard of multiple things. We measure our programs, we measure our costs. I have a statement, and it is this, Mark: the fruit of ministry is priceless, but the work comes with the cost. So we can't ignore the practicality of the alignment of measuring your outcomes against what it costs to produce those outcomes. So that's how we do it.
So true, so true. Arthur, how do you handle accountability at your organization, keeping people accountable to their budgets?
kind of similar to what Billy just said. We put our staff through this thing we call a TQM on each quarter. They have quarterly TQM sessions. TQM stands for Total Quality Management. And what we do, we do this investment analysis of every activity we have here. Was it on mission? I mean, what was your objective? Was the objective met? Did your budget meet its purpose? What was the spiritual impact and financial impact? Because so often people can say, you know, we had a good time, you know, but only 3 folks showed up. So it's things you put in place to make sure every activity, every event is mission focused, and as Billy said, it stays on budget at the same time also. So we go through that on a quarterly basis, and it's called TQM.
Oh, very helpful. Very helpful. Well, we're going to move right along here and talk a little bit about some best practices. We've already noted that I know each of you have some expertise in these areas. So, Billy, what have you found to be some best practices in regards to communication, especially with your board?
Well, that's really important. And let me mention here that none of this activity at Johnny and Friends happens without our board approval. Everything, including our strategic plan model, the SWOT analysis is approved by our board, participated in by our board, all the way from our strategic plan right down through our execution. We have a governance board, so they're not into the detailed parts of how we carry it out, but they sure help set the standard and then go and look at the outcomes. So communicating to our board has become very critical. How you communicate your financial report. Remember, folks, your board consists of a number of people. Some of them are not as financial savvy as you think they are. Their eyes kind of glaze over a little bit when you're talking about finances and projected income, and so it's incumbent upon you, if you are that man or woman who reports that information to your board, make sure you find a good way to talk about it in user-friendly terms. Not that you're not giving them the correct information, but related to them in a way it's understandable. And your staffs as well. Many of them are not, they're not accounting or finance savvy, but they still have to get their work done, and they still have to be held accountable. So take webinars, take classes, whatever it takes for you to be able to take that information you have that is esoteric to you, but make it user-friendly to them. And in that communication process, you bring everybody onto the same page, and boy, you have a board of directors that really are engaged and want to see that organization be extremely successful.
That's true. Let me share this too, Mark, to add on to what Billy just said. It's interesting, every time I have an audit, we have yearly independent audits. The first thing the auditor want to see are board minutes. Minutes from your board. I said, what that got to do with the numbers? But that's why it's key to engage them, and that's one reason we intentionally engage our board of directors at the beginning of the stage. Keep them engaged. Keep them engaged. And if I can put my IRS hat back on, transparency is important. It protects the CFO. So you engaging your board. I have a board member to come to every staff meeting just so they be on top of things, versus just a year-end committee to say yes or no. So you got to be almost intentionally in getting them engaged throughout the year. I don't think we can say enough about the communication with your board.
Arthur, I might add, not almost intentionally. You have to be intentional with your board. You've got to keep them involved. You've got to, because remember, your board isn't just a group of people that are signing off on something.
Right.
You got to look at the board as part of God's plan for the authority and the covering for what you are doing. That board is a part of that process that God established and put in place. So it's important that they actually know where you are, know what you're doing, because they are the people that hold us accountable.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we are wanting to get to some questions that are coming in here, so I'm going to move right on to a section where we can answer some questions from folks. And we've gotten quite a few questions in, and a number of the questions have to do with the wanting to know what the formulas that are being used for the spreadsheet that we showed earlier. And I just want to let everybody know that we're going to provide you with a spreadsheet template that will actually have those formulas built right into it. And so you'll actually be able to see all of those formulas that are being used there. So I know Jerry and Walt and there's a number of other folks, Joe, that have asked some questions about that. So we'll provide that to you so you can see that. So here's a question for you, Billy, from Monica, and she says, how many years do you recommend to do your analysis on to, have it be statistically significant for your regression analysis? So how many years would you recommend?
That's a great question, Mark. Monica, though, I would recommend for certain you never use any data that is not 3 or more years old. But I would recommend that you have 5 years of data or more to build your models with, because the more data, or the more years you have of collected data, the more robust or the more definitive those forecasts will be. So and the reason why I say that, it gives you a sense of how your organization has actually conducted itself. Again, you're not just looking at the raw numbers. It actually looks at, and it's really taking into consideration, this is what we do here. So nothing less than 3, but 5 is a really good starting point, and then taking it from there and moving ahead into your future.
All right. I'm going to address this question to you, Arthur, and then maybe Billy, you can respond as well. But do you use a finance team out of the board of directors to oversee the finances? So do you have a finance team on the board, or just have one person, or a finance committee? How do you have that structured?
Yeah, we actually have a budget committee that's comprised of several board members and the executive team of the staff. And we engage throughout the quarter. Through each quarter, we come together and do variances to make sure that we are staying on budget. And that, too, would keep them engaged throughout the year, especially the board of directors.
How about for you, Billy? How do you have it structured with the board?
Yeah, we do. Our board, and it's important to know, we have what we call the governance board as opposed to an operational board. What a governance board does is set the parameters and expectations of what it expects to see the organization perform. So what we do is, we are structured with an audit committee. We are a member of ECFA, so we have an audit committee. We have an executive committee. We have a board treasurer. I'm the CFO, but we have a board treasurer. We have a finance committee for our board. We actually have committees on our board that looks at compensation, which is our compensation committee. So our board is structured in a way that defines accountability in its best form. So every process of fundraising through our development department is looked at. It is not dictated, but it's looked at. Will it reach the stated aims and so forth? So that's how we do it. We are organized according to ECFA guidelines and suggestions, as well as our auditor, which have been really instrumental in helping us define the board development that we have and how we conduct our internal and external operations here at the ministry.
Okay, I've got a question here from Thomas, and I'll pose this to you, Arthur. He says, we are seeing a trend. Givers want to be more and more focused on the specific ministries they are passionate about and less willing to give to the general fund. And so his question is this common? and how can we adjust this in the budgeting process?
Wow, that's interesting. Well, I think it need to be educated to the people that the church is really the tree and ministries are branches. And you give to the church, and you got to trust. That's why you have a board of directors, you have staff. You got to trust the stewards of the church to make sure that funds are appropriate, allocated properly. Normally, I don't have that problem here at the park, even though sometimes people might designate certain amounts for scholarship, and I can put in scholarships, but I let them know the definition of the tithe and what the tithe means. So I think, and the tithe is the tithe, is what it is. I think that educating our Congress more, if you see that, of what the tithe is and what is for the storehouse of God. So I just think that would require some educational opportunities. Well, yeah.
Well, Arthur, let me jump in here, and I know we're in the closing moments of our webinar, but that really, Mark, your question, that really hits home at Johnny and Friends and other parachurch organizations. Boy, you have a whole segment of your constituency that wants to give to certain programs that you have. And what we have actually learned to do and learned to do well is to segment that part of our constituency that wants to give to various and sundry programs, and we're able to follow them, and we're able to keep track of them, their wants, their desires, and we communicate with them in a fashion that lets them know their giving is being used for what they designated or hope to. But at the end of the day, we always communicate that what you are giving to, in the event it reaches a stated goal, we always remind our friends who give to us that you are supporting the ministry of Johnny and Friends in its entirety. And that's how we're able to work so well with our constituency.
Well, very helpful. Thank you for all the questions that have come in. We have many that we weren't able to get to, and we'll certainly make an attempt to answer some of those and get back to the folks that didn't have a chance to hear an answer to their question. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending an email with the link to the recording of this webinar. Actually, you will receive two emails. The first will connect you with the presentation slides and other resources from today's webinar. The second email will link you to the webinar recording. In the meantime, here are the resources that will be made available online that may be of interest to you. The example and template spreadsheet that we mentioned earlier for forecasting revenue will be made available. In addition, we have a budget checklist which you can use to help you remember and complete all of the important tasks and events as you go through your budget process. I mentioned earlier that Billy had provided an executive summary on the strategic plan model that I believe you will find helpful. And we also have information that Arthur provided regarding the Mapping International materials that he went over as well. We hope that these may be assistance to you as you create or update your own tools which you use at your ministry. One of the things that we've kind of not talked too much about, but is a common topic whenever we talk about budgets, and I know Billy and Arthur both are big proponents of having adequate reserves, cash reserves, and so we have a white paper that's available to you as well on how to determine how much is enough in terms of cash reserves, and that often is a topic that needs to be considered as you consider your budget as well. And we also have a white paper there you can see on you know, budgeting in a changing economy, and so there's those resources, and we have a number of other books and websites and other online resources we're going to make available to you. In addition to that, we want to make you aware of a few upcoming events that ECCU is making available to you. We have a 2012 financial seminar for churches and nonprofits in the Littleton, Colorado area, Fort Worth and Dallas, Texas area coming up in October. We also have a financial forum for ministries that will be available as well in San Diego, Livermore, which is in the Bay Area, Brea, which is Southern California, and then in Colorado Springs in the months of November and December. And for more information and to register for any of those events, please go to our website and go to the resources page and events, and you'll be able to see all of those events and register for those. Well, we want to thank again Billy and Arthur, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Be sure to look for the emails that I mentioned earlier. Also, if you'd like to learn how partnering with an ECCU Ministry Development Officer can connect you with some additional financial tools and resources, please contact them at the phone or at the email that's shown on the screen. And we can even help with going through figuring out cash reserves and how much is enough for your ministry. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you again for attending. God bless you all.